September 1939 marked the beginning of a conflict that would not be decided on land alone. From the very first weeks of the Second World War, control of the Atlantic Ocean became a question of survival rather than strategy. Britain was an island nation dependent on imported fuel, food, raw materials, and industrial components. Without uninterrupted shipping, its ability to continue the war would collapse within months. By early 1940, the Atlantic had quietly transformed into the most dangerous supply route on Earth. German U-boats were not simply attacking ships at random, they were targeting the logistical bloodstream of the Allied war effort. Every tanker sunk reduced fuel reserves, every cargo vessel destroyed delayed aircraft production, vehicle assembly, and troop movement. The objective was not tactical victory, but systemic paralysis. Germany understood something fundamental. Modern war was no longer won by battlefield maneuvers alone. It was won by logistics. At the center of this strategy was the U-boat fleet. German submarines operated across vast sections of the Atlantic, often hundreds of miles from friendly bases. Their mission was to sever the connection between North America and Europe, sink ships faster than the Allies could replace them, and victory would follow naturally. By late 1940 and into 1941, the strategy appeared to be working. Allied convoys suffered heavy losses despite escort protection. Shipping statistics painted a grim picture. More tonnage was being destroyed than shipyards could produce. Escort crews reported repeated contacts, but few confirmed kills. Submarines seemed to vanish after attacks, only to reappear days later and strike again. At first glance, this appeared to be a failure of detection, but that assumption was incorrect. The Allies were not blind. By 1940, most escort vessels were equipped with ASDIC, an early form of active sonar. This system could detect submarines beneath the surface by emitting sound pulses and analyzing their echoes. In theory, this allowed escorts to locate and track U-boats beneath the surface. Yet detection alone did not equal destruction. The true problem lay in the gap between detection and attack. Once a submarine was detected, escorts relied almost entirely on depth charges. These were large explosive barrels deployed from the stern of the ship. Each charge was set to explode at a pre-selected depth based on estimates provided by the sonar operator. The attack sequence followed a predictable pattern. The escort vessel would approach the contact, pass directly over the estimated position of the submarine, and release a pattern of depth charges behind it. The explosions were intended to crush the submarine's pressure hull through shock waves. In practice, this method suffered from fundamental flaws. The most critical weakness occurred at the moment of attack. ASDIC could not maintain sonar contact once the escort passed directly above the target. The sonar beam projected forward, not downward. As the ship crossed over the submarine, the contact disappeared. This created a blind zone at precisely the moment when accuracy mattered most. During those few seconds of lost contact, the submarine commander gained freedom of movement. A sharp turn, a sudden dive, or a change of speed could place the submarine outside the lethal radius of the explosions. Depth charges themselves added another layer of uncertainty. They detonated at preset depths rather than in response to actual contact. If the submarine was deeper or shallower than expected, the explosion did little more than shake the water. Even when attacks failed, escorts often could not tell. Depth charges exploded whether they were accurate or not. If debris did not surface, crews were forced to guess. In many cases, escorts assumed success and returned to convoy duty, unaware that the submarine had survived. German commanders quickly learned to exploit these weaknesses. U-boats practiced precise timing. They listened for propeller noise, waited for the moment sonar contact dropped, then executed evasive maneuvers. Silent running, sharp rudder turns, and controlled depth changes dramatically increased survival rates. The result was a distorted engagement dynamic. Once an attack began, the submarine often controlled the outcome. By 1941, the strategic consequences of this imbalance were becoming clear. Allied losses continued to rise. Convoys required more escorts, more ammunition, and more fuel, yet still suffered repeated attacks. Escort crews expended enormous effort with little confirmation of results. The Atlantic campaign was turning into a war of attrition the Allies could not afford to lose. The situation worsened dramatically in early 1942. Following the entry of the United States into the war, German submarines expanded operations along the American eastern seaboard. Coastal defenses were minimal, convoy systems were incomplete, and shipping losses surged. This period, later referred to by German crews as the Second Happy Time, exposed how vulnerable the existing anti-submarine doctrine truly was. More sonar, more escorts, and larger depth charges did not solve the problem.
The flaw was structural, not quantitative. Engineers and tacticians began asking a different question. Instead of increasing explosive power, what if the geometry of the attack itself was wrong? Why attack from behind after losing contact when the submarine had already been detected ahead? This question represented a conceptual shift. It challenged the assumption that an escort must pass over a submarine before attacking. If weapons could be projected forward, sonar contact could be maintained throughout the engagement. This idea would become the foundation of a new approach to anti-submarine warfare. In Britain, the responsibility for unconventional solutions fell to a unique organization, the Royal Navy's Miscellaneous Weapons Development Department. Tasked with solving problems traditional departments struggled to address, the group focused on practical, rapidly deployable systems. By late 1941, their efforts began to converge on a forward-throwing weapon concept. The principle was simple but revolutionary. Instead of dropping explosives behind the ship, fire them ahead, allow sonar operators to maintain continuous tracking, remove the blind zone, eliminate guesswork. The weapon would not rely on pressure waves alone. It would require direct contact to detonate, ensuring that missed attacks produced no false signals. This concept would soon be named Hedgehog. By early 1942, prototypes were ready for testing. Unlike depth charges, Hedgehog consisted of multiple small projectiles launched simultaneously from a spigot mortar array mounted on the bow of an escort vessel. The projectiles followed ballistic arcs and entered the water ahead of the ship in a circular pattern. Crucially, sonar contact was never lost. Operators could track the submarine continuously, updating firing solutions until the moment of launch. The submarine no longer vanished during the attack window. Each projectile was fitted with a contact fuse. If it struck the submarine's hull, it detonated. If it missed, it remained inert. There were no explosions to obscure sonar returns, no underwater shock waves to disrupt tracking. The implications of this were profound, but at the time they were not yet fully understood. Initial deployments were cautious. Hedgehog did not replace depth charges immediately. Crews had to be trained, tactics had to be rewritten, confidence had to be earned through combat results. But the logic behind the system was sound. For the first time, detection and attack were integrated into a single continuous process. The Atlantic campaign was about to change, not through brute force, but through precision. And that change would accelerate rapidly over the next 18 months. Part 2. By mid-1942, the Battle of the Atlantic had reached a critical inflection point. The Allies were no longer experimenting with new ideas out of desperation. They were beginning to apply them systematically. Hedgehog, which had entered limited service earlier that year, was now being installed across a growing number of escort vessels operating on the most threatened convoy routes. At first, the change was subtle. Escort commanders noticed fewer ambiguous engagements. Attacks no longer ended in uncertainty. When Hedgehog salvos missed, there were no explosions. Sonar contact remained clear. The submarine could be tracked immediately for a second or third attack without resetting the engagement. This altered the rhythm of combat. Previously, a single depth charge run might consume several minutes. After each attack, escorts often had to reacquire contact, reform the screen, and reposition. With Hedgehog, detection, attack, assessment, and re-attack occurred as a continuous loop. Time, which had once favored the submarine, now worked against it. As convoy escorts grew more confident with the system, tactics evolved. Rather than executing a single attack and breaking off, escorts maintained aggressive forward pressure. Submarines were forced to remain defensive for extended periods, draining battery power and limiting maneuver options. By early 1943, Hedgehog was no longer a novelty. It was becoming the primary anti-submarine weapon for many escort groups. Statistical analysis conducted by Allied commands began to show a clear pattern. While Hedgehog did not guarantee a kill, it significantly increased the probability that an attack would result in either damage or destruction. More importantly, it reduced the number of failed attacks per engagement. In earlier years, escorts might expend dozens of depth charges during repeated attacks on a single submarine without confirmation of success. Hedgehog reduced this inefficiency. Successful engagements often required fewer salvos, conserving ammunition and fuel while maintaining pressure on the target. This efficiency mattered because the Atlantic was not a series of isolated duels, it was a sustained campaign. Every escort hour saved, every weapon conserved, translated into improved convoy protection across thousands of miles of ocean. The psychological dimension of this shift, while secondary, was not insignificant. German U-boat crews reported a noticeable change in Allied behavior. Escorts no longer disengaged after attacks. Sonar contact was relentless. The absence of explosions after missed Hedgehog salvos created a new form of uncertainty. Silence no longer meant safety, it meant another attack was imminent. Traditional evasion techniques became less effective. Diving deeper did not eliminate the threat. Hedgehog projectiles were not depth-dependent. Sharp course changes during the attack window failed to break contact. Silent running delayed detection, but did not prevent it once contact was established. The submarine's role shifted from hunter to hunted.
By mid-1943, this tactical shift began to manifest clearly in operational statistics. U-boat loss rates increased sharply, particularly in heavily escorted convoy lanes. At the same time, Allied convoy losses declined. The ratio of submarines destroyed per convoy engagement rose steadily. It is critical to understand that Hedgehog did not operate in isolation. Its effectiveness was amplified by parallel improvements in Allied anti-submarine warfare. Radar advancements allowed escorts to detect surfaced submarines at ranges greater. High-frequency direction finding improved interception of radio transmissions. Long-range patrol aircraft closed previously unprotected gaps in convoy coverage. However, Hedgehog addressed a specific and previously unresolved problem: the disconnect between detection and attack. While radar and aircraft expanded the detection envelope, Hedgehog ensured that once a submarine was detected, it faced a higher probability of destruction. This raises a crucial question: why did Germany fail to develop an effective counter? From a purely technological perspective, German industry was capable of innovation. The country produced jet aircraft, guided munitions, and advanced propulsion systems. Yet none of these developments addressed the tactical problem posed by Hedgehog. The reasons were structural rather than technical. German naval doctrine emphasized stealth and avoidance rather than engagement with escorts. U-boats were designed to strike merchant vessels and evade surface combatants. There was little institutional focus on anti-escort warfare or active counter-detection systems. Submarine-launched countermeasures existed, but they were limited in scope. Noise-making decoys and acoustic devices were intended to break sonar contact temporarily. Hedgehog reduced the effectiveness of these tools by maintaining continuous tracking and allowing immediate re-attack. Developing a new counter system would have required extensive testing, crew retraining, and large-scale deployment. By 1943, Germany's industrial capacity was under sustained pressure. Fuel shortages limited training hours. Shipyards faced constant disruption. Strategic priorities shifted toward defensive measures and last-ditch technologies. Time, which had once favored the U-boat campaign, now worked against it. German responses remained incremental. Submarines attempted deeper dives, tighter evasive patterns, and prolonged silent running. These measures increased survival in individual engagements but did not alter the overall trend. The core issue remained unresolved. Escorts no longer lost contact during the attack phase. As the months passed, the cumulative effect of this imbalance became decisive. By late 1943, the Atlantic campaign entered a new phase. Convoys could be protected with fewer losses. Shipping schedules stabilized. Fuel deliveries became reliable. Industrial output in Britain increased as raw materials arrived consistently. This logistical stability had direct strategic implications. Large-scale operations require predictability. Amphibious landings, armored advances, and sustained air campaigns depend on uninterrupted supply chains. The ability to move men and material across the Atlantic at scale was a prerequisite for any offensive action in Western Europe. Hedgehog, by reducing the U-boat threat to a manageable level, contributed to this predictability. It did not eliminate submarines from the Atlantic. U-boats continued to operate until the end of the war, but their strategic impact was diminished. They could no longer impose unacceptable losses on Allied shipping. This shift was evident in planning documents for major operations. By 1944, Allied commanders could assume that supply convoys would arrive with tolerable losses. This assumption underpinned preparations for the Normandy invasion. Fuel, vehicles, ammunition, and personnel were transported in quantities that would have been impossible under the conditions of 1911 or early 1942. It is important to overstate Hedgehog's role. The Battle of the Atlantic was won through a combination of factors: intelligence, air power, industrial output, and improved coordination. Hedgehog was one element within this larger system.
However, its significance lies in the problem it solved. Before Hedgehog, submarine hunting involved a high degree of uncertainty. Escorts relied on prediction, estimation, and hope. After Hedgehog, engagements became more deterministic. Misses were identified immediately. Success could be confirmed with greater confidence. This reduction in uncertainty had cascading effects. Training improved because results were measurable. Tactics evolved because feedback was immediate. Escort crews gained confidence because effort translated into observable outcomes. In the years following the war, this logic influenced the development of subsequent anti-submarine weapons. Systems such as Squid and Limbo refined the forward-throwing concept with greater explosive power and improved targeting. But the underlying principle remained the same: maintain contact, attack forward, eliminate the blind zone. These ideas continue to shape modern anti-submarine warfare. Looking back, Hedgehog's importance does not stem from its destructive capacity. It was not the most powerful weapon deployed in the Atlantic. Its warheads were smaller than those of depth charges. Its value lay in integration. Hedgehog connected detection and attack into a single uninterrupted process. It reduced guesswork. It transformed submarine warfare from an art into a system. Germany continued to build submarines until the final months of the war, but once the operational rules changed, production alone could not restore the advantage. Without an effective counter, numerical increases failed to alter the outcome. The Atlantic did not become safe overnight, but it became controllable, and once control was established, the strategic outcome was no longer in doubt.